Hello, I would like to welcome our viewers and expert panel to today's Hello, I would like to welcome our viewers and expert panel to today's important discussion concerning new alliances that are changing the Mediterranean region. I would like to thank Andrέas Zipponidis for organizing this forum and panel of experts. Andrέas is the Executive Director of the Mediterranean Council and Forum, President of AHEPA, H.J. Calamaria, Secretary of Association of the U.S. Army Hellenic Chapter, a security risk management and community liaison consultant for the energy and defense industry, and a retired senior NCO of the Hellenic Army. Andrέas, I will hand it over to you for a word about our sponsors and today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kremins, and thank you very much, everybody, that you are here today with us. Of course, I would like to thank our communication sponsor, ProNews, GR, and Copy Local Shop, which is a sponsor for our link today through YouTube and Facebook pages and groups. I would like to thank also General Retired Mr. Morsi, Dr. Sherman from Israel, Dr. Morsi from Egypt, businessman, Mr. Savas Sivinkos from the United States, and businessman Mr. Langfan, and also he's the president of Americans for the Safety of Israel in Florida, United States. Our conversation, we will concentrate to the alliances which change the Mediterranean. And we face that the last agreement between United Arab Emirates and Israel, we can say that shaped the world. And it's another piece in the big puzzle in the Mediterranean and the wider region like Middle East and North Africa, which changed the world. And this happened. This started years ago through the first, let's say, during the first energy ministerial summit between Hellas, Cyprus, and Israel. And we all know that the zone in the Mediterranean, the Greece zone in the Mediterranean is, let's say, the biggest in the area. And we all know that Egypt also involved in that through EEZ, Libya, Cyprus, of course, Israel, and the world faced the violence from the side of Turkey against Greece and Cyprus, especially, and all this situation. It's very difficult also for the United States and other members like France, which we see that the late strategic alliance with France also is a game changer in the Mediterranean. So we have here high-profile personalities and experts and professors that they will speak about these changes in the Mediterranean, and I'm very pleased to have you all here. I will pass the floor back to our moderator for today, Ms. Kremins, and I'm sure that will be very useful conversion. All right.
You have to one.
Thank you very
You have
much,
to turn off
everybody.
one of your devices
Andrea.
because there's feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
All right. All right. We are good now. We are live, and this has happened. This technical problem happens in live shows. I would like to repeat that. I will pass the floor again back to our moderator for today. Hope everybody will enjoy this conversation. Thank you very much again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, just to summarize again, we're here today to discuss the importance of current strategic alliances that are being formed in the Mediterranean region, such as the Israel-UAE peace agreement, and as of Friday, the agreements made with Serbia and Kosovo within the White House. Some of the current alliances are promising to the stability of the region, and others are ticking time bombs, such as the conflict in the region with Turkey. So we're here today to bring awareness and information to listeners to the global importance of these current events taking place in the Mediterranean region. So before we dive into the discussion, I would like to take a brief moment to introduce each panelist, and I'll give you a moment for opening statements concerning these changes in the Mediterranean region. I'd like to start with Mark Langfan, who is the General Managing Partner of Langfan Company, the Chairman of Americans for a Safe Israel, and the Mediterranean Council and Forum's Deputy Director of the Middle East. Thank you for joining us today, Mark. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Am I going to go right now and then everyone else?
Yes, go ahead with
Okay.
opening statements, and then I'll introduce you each one by one for opening statements.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me, Andreas and Danielle.
And we lost Mark.
He's gone.
You're back, Mark.
All
I'm
right.
back.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was thanking everybody. I've been very long an advocate for a robust relationship and alliance between Israel and the Gulf states, and Israel and Greece, and Israel with Egypt. And I hope that this discussion only further cements and solidifies all of those alliances.
Thank you, Mark. Next, we have Dr. Sherman, who is a Doctor of Philosophy and Political Science and Government from Tel Aviv University, and the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Dr. Sherman, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours for opening statements.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting discussion. The matters that we touch on are certainly very topical. I think there have been potentially, and I stress the word potentially, some almost tectonic changes in the map of the Middle East. In the recent article I wrote, although I think it might be a little too soon for Israel to break open the champagne bottles and celebrate a great strategic victory. I think we have to be very careful, and I think Israel still has to keep its powder dry for unpleasant surprises along the way. I think, of course, everything hinges, or a lot hinges, on the elections in November in the United States for presidency, because depending on which way those elections go, Israel, which is my focus of attention, but I think the Middle East and the Sunni world as well, will be in two different strategic universes, depending on who wins, if Trump wins or if Biden wins. And from my personal point of view, I think it would be very, very comforting for Israel if there's a Trump victory, and almost unthinkable if Biden wins. But I think we should leave the elaboration of those statements for the rest of the discussion. So once again, thank you for the invitation. I look forward to an interesting discussion.
Thank you. Next, we have Savas Sivinkos, who is the Supreme Treasurer of AHEPA, the CEO of Cypreco Industries and the former president of the Hellenic Federation of New Jersey. Welcome, Savas, and thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours for opening statements.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you to all the panelists. And on behalf of the Supreme Judge, I would like to take a moment to congratulate Andreas for an outstanding job he's doing as president of the Kalamaria chapter. And we really appreciate his efforts during these very critical times. And today's subject, I think, is very important because we are experiencing some unprecedented changes in the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean. We see new alliances forging that were not even anticipated a few years ago. But the map of the Eastern Mediterranean is taking a new shape. And it's very promising for the peace and stability of the area. The trilateral agreements between Cyprus, Greece, Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and now the new agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. It's very significant because it's putting a new wedge between Israel and Iran. And it changes the dynamics of the area. I believe it's only the beginning of this new era, and other alliances and other diplomatic relations will break. And I believe Bahrain probably will be next. But we are experiencing, though, something else that is very strange. You have one player in that area in Eastern Mediterranean that is threatening Greece on a daily basis, is threatening Cyprus on a daily basis, and is threatening the greater peace and stability of the Eastern Mediterranean, and that is, of course, Turkey. As far as the developments in the area after the United States elections, I don't anticipate much changes. I've been following the developments in the area, but also very involved with the political system, and I can tell you that we have experienced a Biden foreign policy under Obama-Biden administration. He was the architect of the American foreign policy in the area. So we know what to expect. We have seen the actions of this administration. So as long as the relationships are developing, I don't think, even if there is a change, which I don't think it will, they're going to be able to change the relationships that are being forged as we speak. So I will leave it at that for now. And again, I thank all the panelists for taking the time to participate in this very, very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Savas. And rounding out our expert panel is Mahmoud Morsi Tolba, who is a PhD candidate of political science and international relations at Alexandria University, as well as a geostrategic analyst. Thank you for joining us today, Mahmoud. The floor is yours for opening statements.
Thank you very much, Danielle, and thank you, Andrea, for attending such meeting and our honored guests with us. I think it's very important time we have very serious discussions about threats and security and how we build security in this area in the Mediterranean Sea with a lot of new players coming and have a very important role. I think we have now a lot of Mediterranean is with gas is very important interesting. We have political interest and security and defense. All of things is mixing together and will have serious implications on the countries in the area. Israel, Egypt, Libya, Turkey, and other countries. So I look forward to have very great discussions today, and we get back for the other side. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'd like to begin by expanding on what changes you each think the Israel-UAE peace agreement is going to bring to the Mediterranean region. We could start with Mark for that.
Well, I think already you've seen a change or not shipped, flown some of their aircraft over to Greece to buttress Greece in some way, and it's believed in response to the Turkish threat that is waxing. So I think really the key is seeing Israel as almost the hub of a wheel of alliances, to the east with the Gulf states, to the west with Greece, to the southwest with Egypt, and even northward to the Danube countries and many Eastern European countries, which all see Turkey as one of the core problems to overcome with respect to stability and their aggressive expansionist hegemonic desires, in addition to Iran. So I would almost capsulize the entire concept by saying Turkey has almost become the new Iran in terms of being a hegemon that is attempting and has been attempting to expand its Islamist poison almost in every direction possible. And I do want to slightly challenge Savas in his statement that a Biden presidency would not put the relationships and stability at risk, in that if I recall correctly, it was the Obama administration under the military operation of Odyssey Dawn, which threw out Gaddafi and basically set the North African coast on fire to a degree,
in flames,
which was in fact in no small part foisted on the Obama administration by Turkey and Qatar. So and then you had the Obama administration, what their relationship with the entire secular construct of Egypt in trying to put in the Muslim Brotherhood into Egypt and keep it there. So I believe that there's a significant divergence of possibility here, depending on who became the next president of the United States.
Mark, you're right. I was referring to agreements that were just made, that even if a Biden gets elected, it's going to be very difficult to undo. I agree with you. Don't get me wrong. I agree of the mess that it was created under the previous administration in the Middle East. I was just referring to the latest development, that even in the event that Biden is elected, he's not going to be able to break the agreement between the United Arab Emirates, for example, and Israel.
I'm not. When I say break in quotes, what I'm saying is something a little bit more. Not that he would break per se agreements. What I'm saying is that the elements that he would be tending to unleash would put pressure and aggravate the elements. Whereas, for instance, I'll be absolutely upfront. I'm a pro-Trump person. However, at the same time, I believe Trump's approach to Turkey has not been what I would have said is an ideal position. Having said that, there is the beginnings of a change, a significant change in the Trump position on Turkey. You can see it with respect to many of the things that are coming out from African. There was just this week, it was published, the Inspector General of African, which is the U.S. African Command, has just issued a report which basically says Turkey has been doing some seriously bad things in Libya,
Yep.
which has exacerbated and will exacerbate the Libyan situation. And again, the Libyan situation is in my opinion, is ground zero for an absolute follow-on catastrophe in every direction. If Turkey would be allowed to win, it would be a catastrophe for Egypt, it would be a catastrophe for Greece, and it would be a catastrophe for Israel, for every single possible reason. So that, at the moment, is really the act that has torn the shroud off of the tectonic plates that have been pushing Egypt and Greece and Cyprus and for that matter the Gulf states together, because the Gulf states see Turkey almost as every bit as a threat as they see Iran, especially in that Turkey has its claws into Qatar, and having Qatar on the western side of the Gulf is like having the fox in the hen house.
Yep.
Really all of these, and again, at core, and I just want to, my idea is sort of, it's not a novel one. It actually stems from the 1581 map of Bunting, the German cartographer Bunting, if everybody can see, in that Israel is really the hub of all of these.
Mark, we lost you.
Yeah, something.
You're back.
Yeah. The tectonic plates that have really at their core Israel. So, and the strongest element is that if the core is in danger, then all of these other elements are in danger. And the biggest respect there is having some type of forced peace process on Israel, which would really create a new avenue in the West Bank for either Turkey or Iran to spread its malign influence. And again, Turkey, the erstwhile NATO ally, is really representing the biggest threat to everybody here. So at the moment. So with that, I'll throw it over to back to you, Danielle.
Thank you, Mark. Could you, since you're talking about Turkey and Libya, before we get into those questions, could you explain to viewers the conflict, basically what is going on between Turkey and Greece right now?
Well, what's going on between Turkey and Greece is that through many hundreds of years, there has been a battle between Western Europe, that is Christian, and Turkey, which was at the Ottoman Empire, which represented Islam. And there was a push and pull between Turkey, Islam, and Christian Europe. And Greece and Turkey are really the interface in many ways between that battle. And what has happened is that the actual finish line after World War II gave Greece many of the, if not all of the islands in the Mediterranean, up to very close to the Turkish landmass. And Turkey sees those islands, including Cyprus for that matter, as theirs. And Greece, of course, sees those islands as theirs. And they represent not only a huge ocean or Mediterranean Sea mass, but also with the advent of discovering hydrocarbons in the area, it represents all of the hydrocarbons that are underneath these disputed territories. Now, they're not really disputed in that they are Greek, but that is not exactly what Turkey believes, and Turkey is trying to undo and basically trying to steal these islands back from Greece.
Savas, do you have anything to add to that since you're representing Cyprus for us today?
Well, Turkey has been the agitator in the area for many years. But let me go back a little bit and go back to the architect of the new American policy in the Eastern Mediterranean, West Mitchell, and that the present policy is based on Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, with the addition of Egypt. So the pillars of this policy lay on these four countries, and any threat by Turkey will create a lot of resistance by many, and especially by the United States. Now, as far as Turkey is concerned, Turkey has traditionally disregarded international law, international treaties, and that's what it's doing right now. It's claiming exclusive economic zone on its part, and it challenges that islands have territorial waters and exclusive economic zone. And that goes against not only on the smaller islands, but it goes against Crete, against Cyprus. I'm surprised they didn't extend that logic to the United Kingdom. After all, it's another big island. I believe that we are experiencing and eyewitnessing some unprecedented times in the region. It is the first time that there are so many alliances against one common agitator. And as I mentioned, you have Greece, you have Cyprus, you have Israel, you have Egypt, you have France, you have Jordan, possibly. You have now the United Arab Emirates. So I don't know how long Turkey is going to be able to try to destabilize the whole area without being punished. I will agree with Mark that I would have expected a little bit more from the president, from our president, President Trump. But at the end of the day, Mark and everybody, I look at the action, not necessarily the rhetoric, which sometimes gives the wrong messages. And I wish the president were controlling his mouth a little bit. Calling Erdogan his friend time and time again, he doesn't send the right message. But notwithstanding that, look at the agreement between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. A historic agreement brokered by the Trump administration. Look at the lifting of the American embargo against Cyprus. 37 years, Turkey was able to block it. I don't know if everybody's aware of it, but it has been lifted as of last week. It's more symbolic than substantive, but nevertheless, it sends a very strong message. And I think it's time that Turkey is put in its place before it destabilizes the whole area.
Savas, I don't want you to think that I was criticizing President Trump.
No.
Basically, my belief about how he's been dealing with Turkey, especially in Syria, has been anything Trump does that he's going to be excoriated for. So if he were to take a truly appropriate position against Turkey and caused fireworks to happen between him and Turkey, the Democrats would go crazy and say the world's fallen off its axis, even though he would have been doing the right thing. So I think he has been doing the best he can under a very difficult situation where anything he does, he will be attacked mercilessly.
No question about it.
Well, gentlemen, I'd actually like to move to Dr. Sherman and move back to the United Arab Emirates and Israel peace agreement. How does that affect this conflict in Turkey, Dr. Sherman?
I don't think that we should expect a direct impact on Turkey. I do think that the agreement has a lot of potential. As I said before, I'm a little bit more subdued than most on the impact of the agreement. I think that we've had the addendum to it, which is upgrading the Emirates Air Force, and for some reason, every time Israel signs a peace agreement with an Arab country, they feel the need to modernize their army. One might have thought they would have needed a little bit less. I'm not quite sure that I can see a direct, significant relationship on Turkey because, obviously the Turks have excoriated the agreement, so have the Palestinians, so it is ruffling quite a few feathers. But, you can see this, the shifting of alliances here, which very much illustrates what the British statesman Lord Palmerston said almost 200 years ago in the British House of Commons, when he said we have no eternal enemies and no perpetual allies. It is our interests that are perpetual and eternal, and it is our duty to serve those interests. So you can see shifting alliances across the Middle East, probably even more significant than we've seen at the moment. I mean, you remember once that Iran and Israel were very close allies, and the Israeli National Airline was flying regular flights to Tehran, and Israeli companies were building all across the country, and there were even rumors of secret military projects between the two, including a reported ballistic missile project. And as soon as the regime changed, that all fell apart. And I think a very parallel process can be seen. Very parallel process can be seen with Turkey as well. Up until the late 1990s, Turkey and Israel were considered almost strategic allies. With strong similarities, both non-Arab countries in a dominantly Arab regime. Western outlook, Turkey was trying to accede to the EU, and that all changed again with the political change of regime there. So, as I said before, I'm a little less enamored by the thing. I'm sure it's potentially a very good deal. It could be, I think, mainly significant economically for Israel. But I agree with Turkey is the wild card. And the interesting thing is, the two the two neighborhood bullies, Iran and Turkey, are actually on opposite sides of the Sunni-Shia divide, because in many ways the attraction of Israel for the Sunni countries in the Gulf is the fact that it's seen as a bulwark against Shia Iran, but that's not the same sort of the same sort of sentiment that can be assigned to the threat from Turkey, because they're on the both sides, they're both on the same side of the Shia-Sunni divide. There it's basically a matter of politics, and I must say, I know quite a number of Turks who are part of the secular elite there, who are not at all taken by what's happening there. Could there be a regime change in Turkey? At the moment, I don't see it, but I certainly down the line don't think that could be a change, and Turkey could sort of come back to its old secular self. What that would mean for Turco-Greece relations is an interesting question, because they weren't so good even with the previous administration. So I think things are still in flux. I think one of the important things from Israel's point of view that's happening, that someone mentioned before, was the inroads that Israel's made into Eastern and Central Europe with countries like Romania, Turkey, Poland, which is essentially shielded against hostile EU decisions, because decisions that have to be taken unanimously. And that's the fact that Israel has such warm relations with Central and Eastern European countries, I think, was a masterstroke of Israeli diplomacy, which Netanyahu must get credit for. And as I said, that shields Israel against radically anti-Israel decisions at the moment.
Okay. General Morsi, could you speak to the significance of the joint military exercises going on right now with Greece?
Yeah, okay. Joint military exercise almost have important objectives. It is the deterrence. Deterrence is very important for the joint training exercise because it's showing force. When countries coming together in joint exercise, they have the same objectives, the same views, the same means, and the same threats. They're trying to face the threats. And by doing this type of exercise is just showing power, showing force, showing how they face it. And also they, as you mentioned, is the deterrence. Deterrence is a very important factor in determining the objectives on the countries who's fighting together. So here we have which deterrence is making in the Mediterranean. Deterrence is making by the countries maybe to stop Turkish or to stop another countries against fighting terrorists. So the deterrence is showing of power is the important thing. And but one important point I need to add it about Turkish. Turkish have a very important different relations, security, defense, and political decisions. And to understand the role of Turkish, we have to understand their national objectives. Turkish have very good defense relations with Israel. They have defense relations with the United States. They have Engelik, the Air Force base in Turkish, the main one in the Middle East. And also Turkish is a member of NATO. So, and all Turkish, when he started working in Syria and doing with what she was doing, fighting the Akrad in the last few years, they have threatened Europe by opening the gate to have refugees just flooded to Europe. So they have some cards in hand playing with it. So we need to control these cards first to control Turkish. So it is very important to understand how our adversary is working. Going back to military exercise, we have joint military exercise with Israel, with Greece, with Turkish, with the United States. So this kind of exercise is just showing force and deterrence for other countries. Last point I need to add it is that the agreement between Emirates and Israel is just started with warm warm peace, as we call it. We have Egypt here, we have what's calling the cold peace. Cold peace is we have, because cold peace we have, everyone knows that Egypt has 4 wars with Israel, and all these wars have resulted in a lot of casualties and economic implications for both countries, and they're going to Camp David peace agreements. So, and moving from cold peace to warm peace in the just few years. So we need to understand how is the peace, how is the agreement between the countries, what is the objectives, and what is the means and tools. Okay.
General Morsi,
Danielle, could I interject for 2 seconds, just round off what I said before? We were talking about what the implications of the American elections could be. And I would like to remind our participants and the viewers that for the Obama regime, Iran and Turkey were sort of flavor of the month. The Obama regime was very active in pushing through this very flawed nuclear deal with Iran, which Trump has pulled out of. And I think if the elections went with Biden's way, that agreement would probably be resurrected. And Obama was also, very friendly with Erdogan. I think that, as the previous speaker said, I think Trump has a problem in distancing himself too much because of the NATO arrangement, because of the nuclear weapons that are still on Turkey's soil. But I certainly think that Trump would be far sterner with Turkey, as we saw in the case of the incarcerated pastor, when he put very severe measures in place against Turkey. And the other thing, I think, from Israel's point of view, its strategic position has improved dramatically since 2014 and 2016, both by events that were not part of Israeli policy. The one was the takeover by Sisi, who I think today is probably a pivotal politician, and his position is not understood enough by West. I think he should be receiving massive support from Western governments, because he really is the only bulwark against an alternative regime coming into power in Egypt again. And I think he's probably one of the most pivotal politicians in the world today. And his government's facing great threats, not the least of which is the dam that Ethiopia is building on the Blue Nile, and might put Egypt in a very, very difficult position. So I really believe that Sisi is a pivotal nail in the stage that the West is playing on, in Israel and in America particularly.
Yeah, I think, Martin, it is very important to mention that, because I think in the first days of the Sisi staying in Egypt, the presidential, he was saying that our target is have a peace in the area. We have secure, and we have to guarantee peace for all the countries here, our neighbors, especially Israel. And but I need to mention something else, that we remember Camp David between Obama and attending with the Arab Gulf kings of the Gulf state in Camp David, after who is going to sign the agreement 5+1, and he was guaranteed just the secure and the peace from the Gulf states, from Iran. And I think this time he was selling weapons by $6 billion, $60 billion, something like that, to Obama. I think Obama in his last days, he need to do something very important. Agreement 5+1, he just saying it is a guarantee for the Iran stopping nuclearizations, Iran stopping, and they have to stop threat to Israel. I think it was different, because he just looking to Iran, not looking to Turkish. So I think it's very important to consider how each president, United States president, is very. United States have very important national security objectives in the area. And I was just a couple of days listening to CSI, and very important General Chief of Staff Joint Officer, taking that the important of our security in the area is depends on 2 things. First thing, our allies, our partners in the area, have to work with them to defend and use our power. Second important thing is how to inject force, how we move there and we have our force. So it is very important objectives. We have to look for them in the next couple of years. Thank you.
And let's not forget what Obama left behind when he left office. He left a disaster in the Middle East. Look at what is happening up to this day in Syria, in Libya. Thank God for our brothers, the Egyptians. They were able to get out of the mess they got in. And there is a bright future ahead. So yes, I will agree with the previous speakers that a Trump presidency will be a lot harder on some of the agitators, and especially Turkey, because even when it comes to Iran, Biden already announced that if he gets elected, he will resurrect the nuclear deal with Iran, which I'm sure our brothers in Israel are not in favor of. So there are a lot
that's an understatement.
In the greater area. So we have to be watching very carefully as to what is developing. But as I said earlier, having all these countries aligned is going to be very difficult. And I think at some point, we need all the countries in the area need to confront Turkey, because Turkey's goal, and all the speakers, I'm sure they're aware and familiar with it, is this neo-Ottoman idea. Erdogan, we can say whatever we want, but he's telling us every day what he wants to accomplish. He is warning everybody, and he needs to be taken seriously. And it's not only against Greece. Yes, Greece again, just like 2,500 years ago, defended the West, is doing it again. And I'm glad this government was willing to stand up to Erdogan, both in with the refugees that were used as weapons, and now in the Aegean. But we need the other countries in the area to be more outspoken. I was very glad to see Israel for the first time to come out very strongly on the side of Greece. Egypt and the president have similar statements, but I think they should send a strong message to Turkey as well, because what is at stake is the future of all the nations, not only of Greece. It's not going to be limited to Greece. Yes. So that's my input on that.
Mark, could you explain the significance of two NATO countries, Turkey and Greece, going to war with one another?
Well, it really stems back, quite frankly, to Libya, because believe it or not, the First World War, you can trace the First World War almost to Libya, where Libya was the focal point of Italy and Turkey going to war in 1911. And then you had the Balkans erupt as a consequence of that. And we all know the Balkans, the assassination in the Balkans and the war in the Balkans sparked World War II. And the interesting thing here is how the EU countries will come out on this issue, in that Germany has actually hedged its bets and not been as pro-Greece as, quite frankly, it should have, which really
pro-European, you mean? Pro-European, because Greece is part of Europe, so Germany is playing a dirty game.
I agree with I'm agreeing with you. Okay, so it really gets back to almost World War I, where Turkey and Germany were on the same sides in that one. But getting back to NATO, it really shows a possible cleavage in NATO not just between Turkey and Greece, but the components of NATO, meaning Germany. Where will Germany come down if there is some type of conflagration between Turkey and Greece, which further, when you burrow further down, it's actually a severe problem, because in the NATO documents and charters and accessions to NATO, there is a question in the legal documents and in the accession documents of Greece and Turkey to NATO, exactly what, because if you take just a very sort of a simplistic view of the situation, when Greece and Turkey came into NATO, Greece was in possession of the Dodecanese Islands. It was in possession of Crete. It was in possession of Rhodes. It was in possession of all of these things because there was a Greece-Italian peace agreement after World War II, which exceeded all of these possessions to Greece. So theoretically, when the ink was dried on the accession of Greece and Turkey to NATO, the Dodecanese Islands, as well as all of this other area, was Greece. So theoretically, an attack on any of these islands, or quite frankly, an armed threat to any of these islands, would be cause for NATO to defend Greece. And in fact, that would be my position, except when you really dig into the NATO the charter and the accession documents, it's not exactly clear what these islands are under the NATO documents themselves. And I wish the NATO documents were a lot clearer than they are, but unfortunately, I've looked it over, and to say it's opaque is being kind.
Yeah.
But the bottom line here is what Turkey will do is they will claim that these are disputed islands, and they were disputed as of the time of the accession.
Well, they made that argument, Mark. They said that they were not part of the agreement between Italy and Greece, and therefore, they don't agree with it. But
I'm with. Believe me, I'm with you. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying, in fact, what they are doing, even though they can say they were not the party between Italy and Greece, but they were the party between Turkey and Italy.
Absolutely.
So it shouldn't matter whether they were part of a later agreement if Turkey acceded those islands to Italy. Then those islands are Italian islands to deed however the heck they want to deed them. The real question, and what I had said in the last discussion, is that Greece should really take this bull by the horns, and they should go, as any country in NATO is allowed to go, and claim in the NATO forum that they are under a threat, not invoking the self-defense charter, but they should be going, and they should be really pressing the pedal to the metal in NATO and demanding that NATO take a stand that any attack on the Dodecanese Islands or on the economic value of those islands that accrue to those islands under the law of the sea is an attack on Greece proper and will be defended by NATO. And my only concern is that they have not taken that stance up to now, which to me means that they may have canvassed Germany, and Germany might not exactly be on board with that one. So really, well, of course, Turkey's not going to be on board with with that.
But there is also a new dynamic within the European Union and within NATO, and I'm sure you will appreciate this. There is a rivalry between Germany and France as to who is going to be the new leader now that England is basically out of Europe. And I have to congratulate President Macron for having the guts to really come out and show France's allegiance to both Europe and NATO. And it's to express his willingness to stand with Greece and Cyprus if attacked by Turkey. So there is a lot of discussion, and I agree with you. Something has to happen in NATO where they come out with a united and a strong voice. But unfortunately, and you touched on it, you have Germany, another superpower that is playing a dirty game for obvious reasons. You have the defense manufacturing and the sales to Turkey, and the 3 million Turks living in Turkey, in Germany. So there are a lot of things at stake. But what is most encouraging, though, is you have France with its military might, as we speak, in the area, and making it very public that if Turkey provokes and if Turkey throws the first bomb, France is going to be there to defend as a state, not NATO, but is there to defend the border of Europe. We hope to have a more unified policy out of the European Union, which has been a total disappointment, in my opinion. But it's very encouraging also, and I would like to hear from the general of how they feel in Egypt and how prepared are they to react, because Turkey, as Mark put it, is not letting up in Libya, and all these exacerbations, it's a result of the pseudo memorandum that Turkey tried to sign with the so-called internationally recognized government of Tripoli, which is debatable, by the way. So I would like to hear the other speakers.
I think the trigger of war is not easy to use. That who controls the trigger of war in the Mediterranean? Is Turkey is controlling the trigger of war in Turkish against Greeks? No, I don't think so. I think that before going to Libya, I think the situation between Turkey and Greece is controlled by many other factors who control the area. And I think Turkey will be very, very careful how it's dealing with the situation. And I think it's never going to war, because we didn't see any NATO members in conflict before in the 40, 50 years we have NATO as a NATO allies. So it's very important to understand how each member dealing with the other. I think the situation will calm down in some way, and I think coming to war is very important to consider between NATO members. Coming back to Libya, I think Sisi, as President Sisi said, that Sirte and the Gafra is red line for the topic government to cross, and it's very important to understand that the situation is calming down in Libya now. Everyone is talking about peace, about agreement, how to solve the problems on the ground. And I think as Egypt's army is standing on the borders to controlling and watching the area. I have meeting with the defense members, and we're talking about it. We believe that Egypt was very late in doing that. Egypt should do that from very long time ago. But anyway, we're doing that now. And I think is defending and controlling Libya. Libya is very important, and the Turkish is very aware that if they cross the line, they're going to war with Egyptians. So I think it's control and understand what is the situations there. So sometimes I said deterrence is very important in such kind of things. Deterrence is stopping Turkish to cross the line in Libya, maybe stop the Turkish to cross the line in Greece.
Tommy, General, can I ask you a question from your Egyptian point of view? How do you see the things developing in Sinai? Because Sinai is becoming a big problem, and that's something that could destabilize the whole area.
Yeah, it's true. Sinai is a very big problem. It's a crisis. But we should remember that Sinai has a problem during Mubarak time in 1997. I have to say that the situation in Sinai is very complicated, because the tribes itself is living in Sinai is the people who are living in Sinai from 100 years ago. And I think we have to consider how the relations between people in Sinai. President Sisi have doing a very good work. He blockaded all the tunnels for Hamas from Gaza to Sinai. All these tunnels have been stopped now. Maybe sometimes they be able to build someone, to dig someone or another. But as a moving of weapons from Libya, from the west to Sinai, we understand, and I think you understand this very well, that a lot of weapons is smuggling to Sinai from Libya, from anywhere, and just running the tunnels to get to Hamas and to the other Islamic group to attack peoples and have some kind of what is doing there. So it's very important to understand the situation in Sinai is very complicated, but we have to solve it bit by bit. First of all, you need to solve the problems or the tribes themselves, people, the Bedouin who live in Sinai, and solve their problems. I think a lot of prisoners now from the Sinai peoples have been imprisoned in Egypt and many places else. And think the problem is how to solve these people problems. And after that, we have security and stability in Sinai. Sinai is very open area, and to control it take long times, as the president said.
Dr. Sherman, I'd like to move on to Iran. Do the current agreements make an impact on the conflict and the threat from Iran to Israel?
So, sorry, I didn't catch the question. Could you just repeat it?
Do the UAE peace agreement with Israel make any impact on the threat that Iran poses to Israel?
Well, theoretically, perhaps, but if you can see a scenario where the Emirates would allow Israeli forces to land and muster, theoretically brings Iranian targets closer to Israel. As I say, I would still reserve judgment on that. The potential is clear, but I think Israel has to develop ways of dealing with Iran without relying on third parties, perhaps even without the United States. It has the ability to reach it both by air and by sea. We've seen in many ways that Iran is very transparent to Israeli intelligence. Perhaps the crowning example is the spiriting out of the Iranian nuclear documents from the heart of Iran back to Israel, but also their attempts to retaliate against Israeli actions in Syria have been basically feeble and unsuccessful. So I'm not sure at the moment. I mean, I don't think anyone should belittle the threat coming from Iran, but I think Israel has to be in a position to deal with it on its own. And if benefits accrue from the agreement with the Emirates, that's good. But perhaps I'm over suspicious and over skeptical. But I would be very hesitant in putting down secret installations in the Emirates to deal with Iran. But that's perhaps my personal bias.
Mark, could you expand on that?
Well, I think Mr. Sherman is looking at it from as one would from an Israeli point of view. I think looking at it from an Arab point of view, it's a much greater significance in that up to now, in my belief, the Palestinians have essentially been the tail wagging the Arab dog. And there are a great many other threats to the Arabs and to every aspect of the Arabs. And I'm talking about from the Zagros, from the western slopes of the Zagros all the way through Egypt. I don't need to tell the Egyptian general that Alexander the Great liberated Egypt from Persia. It was a terrible, in fact, the Persian occupation of Egypt is a national catastrophe to the Egyptian people, in that they essentially destroyed the pharaonic dynasties single-handedly. And so really what this agreement has done is ask a question. Why? It's a question for the Arabs. Why has the Palestinian conflict been the gatekeeper, and the Palestinians essentially been the gatekeeper to any relations between Israel and the rest of the Arab world? And essentially, by inking this agreement, they have ripped the shroud off of that falsity.
Absolutely.
It's almost like the king has no clothes on. Okay, the UAE has been the role of the little boy and saying, but the king, you're naked. Okay, and we have real threats, and in fact, it's it's a sicker situation, in that who has been one of the biggest cheerleaders of the Palestinians? Iran
And Turkey.
Okay, and you have Iran and Turkey who are fomenting this faux conflict almost to their betterment.
That's true, Mark. What you're saying is true. But on the other hand, much of the anti-Israeli sentiment throughout the Arab world was the result of anti-Israeli incitement by the authoritarian governments there. It wasn't as if the Palestinians basically incited public opinion from Syria and places like that. It was the Arab governments that used the Palestinians as sort of a unifying theme to their own regime.
Exactly. So, but what has happened is you had, 30 years ago, you had the Arab leaders deflecting the problems that were confronting their countries by claiming it's the Israeli boogeyman. But that mantle has been handed over or grabbed by Iran and Turkey for the same exact reason, to in fact destabilize the Arab countries, and to
the irony is even bigger than that, because both Turkey and Iran were once close allies of Israel.
Yeah, but they went a different direction, and I will agree with Mark that the Arab world, for the first time after a long time, started analyzing what's happening in the area, and they have decided to take a different approach. And it's no accident that this agreement happened between Israel and it's going to continue with other countries. It's already in good terms with Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, now with the United Arab Emirates. But look at the players within the Palestinian conflict. For example, and I didn't see a condemnation statement by the Arab League. Erdogan,
just the opposite.
Erdogan hosted all the terrorists, basically Hamas in Turkey. Where is the Arab League? For God's sakes, known terrorists. Okay, but I give them credit, at least moving towards the right direction and leave it that behind, because they are not stupid. They cannot be stupid. I mean, you have Iran, as the professor said, and you have Turkey. And I have to tell you a story based on Turkey and Iran. We were in Israel, and we have very high-level meetings. And I will bring up the subject of not identifying Turkey as an enemy or a danger to Israel. And basically, everybody was saying that we are concentrating Iran now, until we got to the Prime Minister's office. Okay, and I brought up because I couldn't accept the answer they were giving. Well, his right-hand man put on the wall a map as to the activities of Turkey, okay, all around the area. And by the time we got to Greece, the Defense Department of Israel, for the first time, has identified that Turkey is indeed a danger to Israel. So the Arab countries and the Arab League have to really look at their national interests and decide if they're going to be hostages to the Palestinian problem or they're going to look to the future. So these developments in the area, I think they have a larger and a more significant impact in the general area. And having a stable Egypt under the presidency of Mr. Sisi, it brings some hope in the general area. And I think this working of these strong alliances will eventually push Erdogan either back or out of the way. I believe that Erdogan should be confronted militarily because he doesn't understand any other way, as the president of France said the other day. He only understands actions because he's a threat to every country in the area.
I support all what you said. Yeah, I completely agree with you. But we have three things here to talk about. First one is, how is Iran angry or pleased with the peace agreement between, and how Iran is looking, how Iran is considering it. First thing is the importance of the agreement between Emirates and Israel, for example, is a defense and security, but the economic part is very important because they maybe have joint projects. Israel have now the power to jump in many projects in Dubai ports, in Yemen ports, in the Gulf, in many areas. So Israel, and it's not bad. It is very good for Israel. Israel now is paving the way to encircle Iran. And Iran understands that. How is coming now from the Mediterranean to the Gulf. They be on the other side of the Gulf in the front of Iran. So it's very controlling. Iran is looking, Israel is coming very, very closer to them and understand how Israel will be able and could play a very important, serious role in economic relations with Dubai in some security and defense perspectives. This is very important, and Iran understanding that, and we as military, we understand it could be a threat to Iran. No, we can't deny that. Second thing is how is Turkish important in for Gaza and Hamas. No one can say that Egypt have paid a very long price for the war and in Gaza Strip and the conflict in Gaza. Egypt have supported Hamas and Palestinians, not Hamas first, but the Palestinian as all united country. I support Egypt is playing a very big role in peace agreement. And if the Palestinians have listening to President Sadat, when said that the Palestinians should come to peace agreement in 1981, first one, to have their rights, and I think the problem could be solved in that time. But I think the other problem is Hamas is Turkish supporting Hamas, is Turkish, Iran is supporting Hamas, and this is going to play. But it is we need to consider the streets and the public opinion. Many in the streets and public opinion looking for the peace agreement, for looking for what is the other president doing against Israel. Just some way is against the public opinion, and we use the public. So we need to consider how the people in the street understand and looking such agreement. And it's very important because these people who elect the president, these people who have a lot, he can put stress in the president in the street and the government. So we need to consider how is the situations in all playing. And I think the main important is to fix the situations in Hamas, in Gaza, to fix situations in the West Bank, and to have some kind of sort of peace, stability in the area. See, what we can do that, when we do that, we will support the peace agreement between Israel, Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. And I think the people will understand how is the agreement will have implications in the situations in Gaza and Hamas itself.
General, on that one, I agree with you that the streets' opinion is very important in Egypt. And I would just hearken back to, I feel it is, people like yourself and other Egyptians to basically explain to the Egyptians writ large that Israel is in fact a valuable asset to Egypt. Both from a Muslim Brotherhood, Turkish type of threat, and or an Iranian type of threat. And the Iranian threat is really, in my view, similar to Iran's goal in Egypt is to really neuter Egypt by having an Islamist takeover. That is their goal. They don't really believe they're going to control Egypt. Turkey, on the other hand, believes that it could possibly, by a Muslim Brotherhood takeover, actually accede to control Egypt to a way. Yep. And that's really where Libya is coming to the fore here. So I really think it is in all of our best interests for people to explain to the Egyptians that we're no longer in the 1960s. We're no longer in the 1970s. We are now in the 2000s. And in the 2000s, it is in the Egyptians' best interest to remain as prosperous and as independent and as secular as it can be for the best interest of Egypt and the Egyptians themselves.
General Morsi,
I completely agree with you, Mark. I think one of the main objectives we have learned in Royal College Defence in UK is just security, stability, and prosperity is the main objectives of all the countries. And one visit to Israel is just, it is very opinion is just very clear that the people now or the presidents in any country in the area in Israel and Egypt have to work together to just have to keep this main objective, security, stability, and prosperity for both countries. And I think with this agreement with Emirates, with other countries in the area, we can improve it and can support people in the streets to understand that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But General, going back to your previous point, regarding Libya, which I think is going to help for the whole area to explode. I understand Egypt has some certain red lines, but those red lines are not outside Libya, they are within Libya. Now, you know what's happening with cancer, right? If you don't treat it, it's finally taking over. Yeah. Now, if Turkey manages, and is doing that, to build bases and establish itself within Libya, don't you think it's a matter of time when it's going to be knocking on Egypt's door? I mean, if you can elaborate on that, I understand the red line being if they come close to Sirte or another town, but I don't know if that's a good policy for the future, because if they establish themselves within Libya, you're eventually going to have to deal with them.
Yeah. First of all, we need to understand the social relations between Egypt and Libya. From 50s, I think 30% of Egyptians have been married in Libya, and the same in Libya. Egypt and Libya have very long social relations. In every family in Egypt, or I think 30%, and in Libya, many people have marriage, have such kind of relation. So going to Libya and fighting in Libya is very serious subjects, very serious to just go and fighting and say. So you have to clear your objectives. You have to clear what you are in mind when you're going to Syria and to Libya and defend the people in there. So it's very important one. And I think now it is people, Egyptians, is doing that in Libya, to Libyans to understand what is the objectives on the ground. Yeah. On the other hand, is, as you mentioned, is Turkish to build some bases or no, I don't think Turkish will have the power for doing that. Maybe this is temporary one. This is temporary to having some military bases, some economic bases to use it in the future. But I didn't think it will be stand for a long time. It's just for a while now. The problem is how to bring the Libya united again together. And I think with both the government, we need to have united government again. And Egypt is working with that. Egypt is very late, as mentioned in the beginning, but I think Egypt is doing that using this kind of relations, is the old relations between Libya and Egypt to support the people in the Libya and just to have some kind of peace and stability in Libya.
Gentlemen,
can I just
you sure can, go ahead.
Oh, please.
You were talking about the settlement of the Palestinian issue before, and and just now you mentioned being very clear in your objectives. I don't know if I'm putting the cat among the pigeons at the moment, but one of the attraction of Israel as an ally for the Sunni world is the image of power that it projects. If Israel were, by any forced peace agreement, was compelled to relinquish the what you call the West Bank, the highlands of Judea and Samaria, it would make it very vulnerable and far less powerful as an ally, because it would have to redirect so many of its resources that are now being allocated towards dealing with the Iranian problem to deal with the Palestinian issue, because you run the danger of allowing a mega Gaza being set up on the doorstep of Greater Tel Aviv and threatening many population centers and infrastructure installations and mechanisms. So in many ways, I think it's almost counterproductive for many of the Arab world who see Israel as a strong ally to try and pressure it or make some progress on the Palestinian issue contingent on forging better relations. Because I think something like that would make Israel far less attractive. As I said, it would have to divert a lot of resources that it's now focusing on common enemies to a new threat, which at the moment hasn't yet materialized.
Mr. Sherman, I agree with you. However, I don't think that's what the general said. I think he said, with respect to the street it would be helpful if there was some type of further settlement with Israel in some configuration on the West Bank. My very core point was we had heard for years we were told it was drummed in our mind that there can't be any peace with any Arab country before there's an absolute West Bank Palestinian state. I feel the importance of this agreement is it actually took that theory and threw it into the waste paper basket.
I've got no dispute with that.
Yes, true.
The question is, what will be the long-term significance of the principle that you just expounded over time? That will be the test of time. Because if new agreements are made contingent on concessions to the Palestinians, they may be counterproductive.
I 100% agree with you, but at the same time, it is not exactly the Arab and the Arabs' leaders' fault that they have this perception. It is, unfortunately, in Israel itself, there is a hugely divided, at least on the surface, appearance that there's a two-state solution, and all you have to do is turn the lights off and give the keys, and bang, boom, bomb, you have you're in peace land. Okay.
No, I agree with what you're saying.
And
but in many ways, the anti-Israel sentiment in the Arab world is a function of the actions taken by a regime. There, I 100% agree with you about the divide in Israel, but I think that the Arab governments who control or at least influence greatly the media in their countries could be far more proactive in trying to change public perceptions of Israel because it's in their interests.
Well, I think you're seeing that. I think you're seeing that very actions being taken in Egypt. From what I read, the government was explaining to the various newspapers that it was in Egypt's superior and strategic interests to not set the world on fire. And certainly the fact that the Arab League refused to even discuss the issue, I think speaks volumes to that the leaders in the Arab world are beginning to hopefully realize that what has gone on, at least on the surface till now, has got to change, not for Israel's benefit, but for their benefit.
Yes.
And I think,
Mark, you mentioned, Mark, very important point that regard what is happening in Palestine, in Gaza and Hamas and in West Bank, people there need to understand that the Arab leaders have to go for their interest and the national security and stability and have some agreement or have peace agreement with Israel. We have to improve. We can't stop just because of Israel or for Hamas and Gaza for a long time, just watching, and we don't have improved these relations. Even there is some relations, but we need to have to move to full complete relations with Israel. And I think Hamas and Gaza and Fatah need to understand that what is happening in Emirates, between Emirates and Israel, between Egypt and Israel, between all Arab countries to improve the relations, it should coming back to Palestinians to support them. So we need to understand that. One point. Second is the people in the street need to understand too that the relations and the people should improve with Israel, with Arab is coming back to improve the peace and security and stability in the area.
Gentlemen, I'd like to move on to a slightly different topic before we run out of time here. These agreements are causing a lot of these countries to move their embassies to Jerusalem. Savas, should Greece relocate their embassy to Jerusalem as well?
Well, it's a very tough question, but I think the trend is towards that. there is a lot of resistance, as you can see from mostly the neighbors and the rest of the Arab countries because of the existing problem there. I don't know if Greece is at the position right now to exacerbate some of its relations with some of the Arab countries by moving the embassy, but I think eventually it's going to take place. We have seen that Serbia announced the other day that it's doing so, and it has to be the right time. I have to tell you that before Greece moves its embassy to Jerusalem, they have to declare an exclusive economic zone with Cyprus, or extend their territorial waters to 12 miles. That's where they should be concentrating at present in order to stop the expansion, the expansionist ideas of Erdogan. But going back to moving the embassy is more symbolic than anything else, and it has to happen at the right time without creating unwanted problems at the time when Greece is facing basically an invasion of its territory by Turkey.
Okay. One other question I would like to get in deals with Macron. He had said we need to create a Pax Mediterranea to stop imperialist Turkey. Does anyone have a comment on that?
Well, I'm glad he had the guts, as I said earlier, to come out and say that. And I think the entire neighborhood it's very appreciative of Macron's statement. He's the only one basically representing Europe and representing NATO, and it's about time that we have a leader who has the might behind him to stand up and bring everybody together to resist what attempts to blow up the entire area. I hope after the elections, President Trump will take a stronger stand and send the right message to Erdogan that it's either retrieve or you will be destroyed, as he did with the release of the pastor, where he wrote a personal letter to Erdogan, basically telling him, "Don't be a fool, you will be destroyed." So that's my comment.
Does anyone else weigh in on that?
Yeah, on the moving the capital to Jerusalem and Greece's role in that somehow, I actually see from a completely different lens, in that in America, American Greeks have generally been Democrats. In fact, we had a presidential candidate in the form of Michael Dukakis, who was Greek, and the Greeks have a large Hellenic caucus in the Congress. And getting back to what Mr. Sherman has said, the American Greeks could be a vital asset to Greece, in that if they came to understand how a strong and robust Israel was absolutely in the best and most vital interests of Greece, they would realize that imposing a two-state solution of the sort that the Democrats generally mouth about would actually be in the worst interests of Greece, because it would really be in the worst interests of Israel. And it would severely degrade, as Professor Sherman pointed out, it would severely degrade Israel's military order of battle, and hence, in effect, weakening Greece's order of battle in this pool of the Mediterranean. So I believe that the focus should not necessarily be on Greece moving its embassy to Israel, but American Greeks exerting their political power to temper the worst impulses of the Democratic House at the moment, and potentially even a Democratic president and or Senate if the election goes the way of the Democrats. So I feel strongly that the American Greek public needs to understand that Israel is no longer the Israel of the 60s or the 70s, and the Israel of today is a vital asset and ally of Greece and needs to be protected and not dictated to in terms of territorial concessions, which could lay Israel open to terrible types of attacks.
Mark, I have to tell you that we are working very closely with our Jewish brothers here in the United States, with the largest Jewish American organizations. We have joint trips. We're working with the American Jewish Committee. And I can tell you that the community is not in the majority or the left or the right. I think the community is evenly split. So we respect each other's agenda, and we always try to be helpful to each other's efforts. So it makes a lot of sense to follow the lead when it comes to Israeli-related issues, and same when it comes to Greek and Cypriot issues. I just wanted to make that clarification that our relationship hasn't been better ever, and we're looking forward to even stronger ties to serve the interest of our central lands.
If we're talking about the understanding or the lack of understanding of Israel's position in the international theater, and perhaps especially in America, I would place a lot of blame at Israel's doorstep, because I think Israel has been very remiss in understanding the importance of a strategic public diplomacy initiative to bring about understanding of the conditions that it has to deal with. You know, for years I've been saying that if Israel were to invest 1% of the state budget in public diplomacy, that would be well over $1 billion compared to the paltry amounts that it spends now. And with over $1 billion, you can change a lot of minds and win a lot of hearts. Among other places in the Greek community, there in the U.S. campuses, and I think a far more robust and resolute stance by Israel itself in confronting the public diplomacy attacking its position could do a lot to generate freedom of movement for its leadership. I think that the Israeli government has been very derelict in this issue, because in many ways, public diplomacy has the same effect as the Air Force. You know, the traditional function of the Air Force is to generate freedom of movement for the ground troops so they can achieve their objective, whereas on even higher level, public diplomacy should generate freedom of action of the Israeli strategic planners and Israeli policymakers to achieve their objectives. And I think Israel has been very lax in accepting so-called political constraints rather than conducting an aggressive and assertive diplomatic offensive across the world, but particularly in the United States universities, and among the various minority communities in the United States, including the Greek minority.
Gentlemen, before we move on to closing statements, I want to go back and get your opinions once again on the Macron statement that we need to create a Pax Mediterranea. They sell aircrafts to Egypt and they want to sell French aircrafts to Greece. What do you have to say on those points? Macron's point.
Should I start?
Sure, go ahead, Mark.
Well, as Savas said, President Macron has come strongly on the side of Greece, but I would posit he's coming strongly on the side of France first, in that he sees an Egyptian, he sees a Turkish bridgehead in Libya as what it is, a catastrophe for the entire southern belt of Europe. Principally, the same way now, unfortunately, Greece has to deal with threats of Turkey holding the spigot of what I call the soft invasion of the Muslim immigrants. Not only will Turkey have a east-west spigot, but if he gets control of Libya, he could very well have a north-south control of this soft invasion, which is a terrible situation that Greece has been dealing with, and that Southern Europe has been dealing with to some degree. But if Turkey got hold of Libya the way it wants to, it would be an absolute disaster for the south of Europe, as well as representing a possible congealing of the Libyan Turkish economic exclusion zone, which cuts the Mediterranean in half and represents an area denial impediment east-west through the Mediterranean, which would be a catastrophe for Egypt with its use of the Suez Canal, as well as any aspect of what we now see as the Mediterranean. So I think Macron sees the Turkish move for what it is, which is it would be an absolute catastrophe for what Winston Churchill called the soft underbelly of Europe.
Also, it is very important to understand that when Turkish is controlling Libya, as you mentioned, controlling refugees get to Europe is one. Second, control the Libyan resources and economics, and also just can control the oil. Is going from Libya to Italy and France. Libya is the main resources of oil, and they get oil, especially oil from the European countries. And the second also is maybe just pass Muslims, radicals Muslims from Libya to Egypt, and maybe more than radicals, weapons and drugs and many other stuff could have destabilized Egypt. So it's very important to understand that just accepting Libya, a Turkish in Libya, is very serious object, and I think France or Egypt have to work very strongly to get Turkish out of Libya.
Can I just say that, I think it's a good idea. I think it's motivated by good intentions. I'm just wondering whether we'll have the steam and the stamina to stand the test of time, and what would happen if the next elections in France, a socialist government is elected. What would that alliance? What would that mean for that alliance? So I think it's probably a move in the right direction, but I'm not sure that I'd bet the farm on its efficacy.
Well, in geopolitics, there are no friendships and there are no feelings. And it's no accident that France has moved in the area. And of course, I'm in favor of such a pact. But at the end of the day, each country is going to look at its own national interest, its own security. I think it is a very good time, because it seems that all of the countries that we are mentioning have aligned their interests in one way or another, and having a strong country such as France be willing to come in. And yes, you can say playing the policeman of the area. I wouldn't have a problem with that as long as they are on our side. I welcome that. If we manage to cement that agreement, it won't matter in the long term, because if it's cemented, it's going to be difficult to undo. Don't forget that in addition to that, we have the gas forum, which you have 7 countries, including France again, that are part of that. So the more alliances, the more agreements, the more cooperation, the more exchange of different things is bringing the countries together. And together they're going to protect the security and the stability of the East Mediterranean. And eventually, as I said earlier, Turkey has to be confronted. I just got an alert on my phone that as we speak, Erdogan is meeting with Haraj of Tripoli. So he has his eyes on the ball. Do not underestimate Erdogan. As great as he is,
he's a very tough and able person.
I agree with everything you've said, Savas.
Yes. Gentlemen, I'm going to give you each 3 minutes for closing statements. Within those, if you could mention to everyone, obviously these changes are extremely important within the region. However, could you explain to others around the world and in America why they should care about these issues and how it affects them within your closing statements? Mark, we can start with you.
Okay, well, I think everyone here has shown how really the burgeoning and congealing relationship between Egypt, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, maybe France, is one that is going towards peace and economic benefits to everyone, and how you have an interloper in the form of Turkey who is trying to really break this entire mosaic. And you have to understand why they want to break that mosaic. And that is because they want to become something that they are not today. They want to become a hegemon over the area and wield a power that would be catastrophic in the best interests of everybody. And I would urge everyone watching to just take out a simple map and look at the Mediterranean and ask yourself what would happen if Turkey was able to somehow destabilize things, that instead of you having all of these countries be separate countries and have nice relationships with each other, you had essentially a neo-Ottoman Turkey attempting to destabilize all of these countries and have not all of these countries working together, but instead having a one Turkey, one country conglomerate all of these countries under a hegemonic, despotic, Islamist caliphate, because that is essentially what Turkey is aiming for. They are really aiming for an Islamic state, and we were just fighting an Islamic state in Syria. Can you imagine if Turkey became an Islamist caliphate? And that is essentially what they are attempting to do. They are attempting to become an Islamist caliphate where all of their actions, including the turning Hagia Sophia into a mosque, as well as many of its other actions, all of these are dog whistles to the Islamists and a threat to all peace and stability in the Middle East and the entire world.
Thank you, Mark. Dr. Martin Sherman, could you give us your closing statements, please?
If you're asking what the importance is for the United States, is I think what we're seeing is the prospect of a double-edged ogre emerging, one extremist Sunni in Turkey and the other extremist Shia in Iran, which are basically the antithesis of the kind of values that America sees itself as the guardian of and wishing to promote. And, I think history has proved that in many ways far-off threats suddenly become very real for America. America's been embroiled in a number of wars, from incidents that have been far from its borders and have spilled over and compelled it to take action. So I think that America should be very keen, first of all, to contain both Turkey and Iran, which, in parentheses I say, which would be deeply affected by the elections in November, and should support the fact that the countries that are basically on its side in the battle for these values. And again, let me stress, I think that in many ways, the importance of Sisi has been underestimated by the West. I think he is a pivotal actor, and nothing could be more disastrous than his unseating for Israel, for America, and probably for Europe as well. So I think the importance of this emerging realignment is very critical and very immediate for the United States.
Thank you, Dr. Sherman. Savas, could you close us out with your closing statements as well?
Yes, again, on behalf of AHEPA, I would like to thank the participants and you, Danielle, for an outstanding session today, and especially Andreas for putting it together. But going back to your question, why should the world be aware of what's happening in the Middle East and in particular in the Eastern Mediterranean? You know, that area has been associated with war and instability for many years. That's what we've been hearing in our lifetime. And it is the first time, after a long time, that it seems that peace, prosperity, and stability is within reach. Actually, it's being cemented on a daily basis. So it's very important that we keep these alliances, we keep these relationships. And I think the countries of the area, especially Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Egypt, Jordan, now the United Arab Emirates, come together and contribute to a solution in Libya, where it can bring stability and security for that country, which in return will contain the danger of exporting another war, and hopefully bring an end to the civil war in Syria, which has many foreign actors contributing to the continuation of the war. But as far as America is concerned, and being in the States for almost 40 years, I have to tell you that it's in the best interest of the United States, and I'm very glad that it has decided to generate a policy in the Eastern Mediterranean the last 3 to 4 years, and forged alliances, and based in its policy on the 3 pillars plus 1, which is Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. Greece and Cyprus being members of the European Union, Israel being a regional power, as well as a very peaceful and strong Egypt. I think it sends the strong message. The developments with France are very encouraging. The danger of breaking up NATO gets the attention of this administration. And I have to tell you that if we were not in an election, a very contested election, America would have been a lot more involved. And I believe that on November 4th, you will see a drastic change as far as attention is concerned. Turkey needs to be confronted. Turkey is an agitator, and Mark is absolutely right. It's no secret. It's not a conclusion. Erdogan made it very clear. He wants to revive the old Ottoman Empire. He wants to revive the new caliphate, and him to be the leader of such a war. He was encouraging and very involved with the Muslim Brotherhood when they went on power in Egypt. And he has been very vocal and very disappointed and very nasty, I would say, to the president of Egypt now, Mr. Sisi, because Sisi stands his ground and is not a pushover. So Turkey is creating problems with all of its neighbors. The doctrine of the former foreign minister Davutoglu, zero problems and good relations with the neighbors, has been changed to a lot of problems with all the neighbors, and it creates a huge danger in the Eastern Mediterranean. A war between Greece and Turkey, it won't be contained just within the two countries. The stake of Europe is up. The stakes are very high, and the United States and Europe as a whole must really take a strong stand. Otherwise, things can get out of control, and they can destroy the efforts of 2-3 decades of cultivating good relations that will lead us towards peace and prosperity. With that, I have to say that I'm not very optimistic. It's not a matter if it's going to be a conflict between Greece and Turkey. It's a matter of when it will take place. If pressure is put on Turkey to retrieve and respect the territorial integrity of Greece, then Prime Minister Mitsotakis made it very clear that they are not going to start that. And let's don't forget that Turkey has been occupying Cyprus since 1974. They have caused a lot of tensions because they are refusing to withdraw from Cyprus, and they are basically controlling the destiny of the Turkish Cypriot community in Cyprus, and that creates more tensions between Greece and Turkey. But I'm hopeful that Europe as a whole, and especially Germany, hopefully Germany will stop playing games, will come out strongly and send a strong message to Turkey. And again, with the United States being more active and France taking the leadership, I believe that we're going to see a de-escalation, unless an accident happens. And when you have so many military ships and daily dogfights with the fighters, an accident can happen anytime, and who knows what is going to follow. We need to keep watching what's happening, and in our part, we need to contribute to the betterment of relations between our respective ancestral lands, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and Egypt. And I'm very happy to inform the General that there is a lot of cooperation between the diaspora of the two countries. Relations have come a lot closer. And as I said earlier, we're working very, very closely with the American Jewish organizations in promoting our common goals and our common agenda. I thank you all very much.
Thank you, Savas. General Morsi, if you could round us out, the floor is yours for closing statements.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an honor. We have a great discussion here. Just I was talking about first of all, talking about United States policy. I think United States is when they absent from anywhere, someone else is jumping in and playing a role. When United States just take the stage for Syria, for Russia, and Russian is jumping in and playing with Turkish and have a lot of guests in Syria. Now the same in Libya and same in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is controlled by a very Turkish and by also is Russians there. And we need to understand how is the Turkish, how is the Russians is playing their role there. The other thing is the United States have to jump in and have the policy to just control the area and control what is going on in the Mediterranean and just deny the Russians and the Turkish role. The Russians and Turkish has a very great role. They have a lot of cooperations with each other and they have a lot of things to do together. The most important thing when we watching the Mediterranean, we find that Israeli is first one and Egyptians. Israeli and Egypt have a very important role to play in the Mediterranean. Both countries has very strong military, very strong defense, very strong relations with all the other countries. So they have to build together a strategic bilateral economic and defensive security to just control the Mediterranean, just to push Turkish out, to control the area and have to establish this kind of relations with the other country. So I think it's important to have Israel and Egypt together to support the security in the Mediterranean and have to support from other countries, from France, from EU, from the NATO. And I think Turkey will not stop until they have find a strong face off from Israel and Egypt, just controlling this area very well. Very well is controlling by economic and by defense and by political relations to just fight against Turkish and against Russians. So if this happens in some way, absolutely with the control of United States. So in this way, only everything will be going down and just we will say Turkish is going back to their place and just leave the area for the other countries to improve and have such security and stability. Thank you.
Thank you, General Morsi. Well, gentlemen, you are a wealth of knowledge, and on behalf of our viewers and the Mediterranean Council and Forum, we'd like to thank you for your time and expertise today.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you, Andreas and Andrea.
Thank you, Danielle. Well done.
You did a great job, Danielle.
I would also like to thank our viewers around the world, Egypt, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, and the US and beyond. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to pass it over to Andreas for closing statements. Andreas, the floor is yours.
I'm very grateful to all of you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you for your job. Thank you very much, everybody, and each of you for this great and productive conversation. We receive a lot of questions, a lot of likes through YouTube and Facebook. Really, I am impressed for your statements and your opinions and your point of view. Of course, we all know we are living in a very fragile era, in a very extremely fragile period, and every day the area changed, and every day the situation is changing. So we are here and we are monitoring the situation. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you, our viewers from all around the world. And thank you, Mr. Lang, Dr. General Morsi, and Tsivikos. And of course, thank you, Daniel, for your great job. I will pass for against you. I would like to thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, it was a pleasure seeing you all, and hopefully we do this again.
Absolutely, Savas. It was a pleasure hearing you.
Yes.
Likewise. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you, Mr.
Absolutely.
Sherman. And
Nice
you,
to meet you
Morsi.
too.
God bless you all.
And Jen-